Thank you again to all of you who came down and shared your stories, especially those of you who shared the personal aspect of this to you and your families. As I mentioned at the beginning, there's no fast track here, so we're on a journey to learn about the impact of this new expression in our economy. And as many of you said, you urged us to get it right, and we want to do that as well. So we'll close public comment and now move to a discussion of some of the alternatives that have been suggested, and then the rest of our agenda. And by the way, when we're done with this item on our agenda, I suspect that many of you don't want to stay for the rest of our committee agenda items, so if you could quickly leave and keep your conversations outside so we can continue, that'd be great. Thank you. So Nate and Ketel are here, and I think we're going to start off with just a discussion of the some of the alternative suggestions that have been made.
I'm Nate Van Duzer in Councilmember Burgess's office.
Ketel Freeman, Council Central Staff.
And I wanted to start by saying you're seeing a slightly different cast of characters because Ali Panucci on Central Staff is out this week, and David Mendoza from the Mayor's office has a conflict, but we're still working very collaboratively and productively with the Mayor's office and City Department staff on this. To start, I thought I'd quickly overview the original proposal, and that was, we made a distinction based on primary residence and secondary residence, but we said regardless, under 90 days, we would not be regulating any activity under 90 days. But if you went over a 90-day within a year, you could continue to do so in a primary residence, but you would not be able to do so in a secondary residence. And we discussed that last month, and two main policy questions came out of that discussion and other conversations we had with stakeholders. The first one was, how much should the city rely on the rental platforms in our regulatory approach? So our original proposal had a fair amount of flexibility in that kind of 90-day hands-off period, and we thought that was good for the city. We thought that was good for users, good for the platforms, but that flexibility requires cooperation and data sharing. And in lots of follow-up conversations, we haven't gotten any signals that platforms are willing to share the data that we would need in a way that would allow us to have effective enforcement.
And in saying so, you are referring specifically to the data that would allow the city to track the number of days that a short-term rental is being made available and whether or not they're meeting that 90-day cap.
Exactly. If we wanted to have any sort of grace period or cap as opposed to a clear threshold right at the beginning, we would need to be able to have data that tells us how many nights are being rented at each listing.
And the platforms will not provide that information. Is that for all of the platforms? And if whether it is or not for all the platforms, what is the reason?
We've heard some concerns about privacy. We've heard some concerns about federal statutes around data sharing. Those are the main ones, I would say. We've had very good and productive conversations with Airbnb of all the platforms. I think they've engaged with us the most proactively, and they've offered various alternative solutions, but none of them get us quite to where we need to be for our regulatory staff to feel like this would be an effective system.
I appreciate that point, and I appreciate the willingness of some of the providers to work with us, but I do think from a city's perspective, a policy should be that we set up some sort of regulatory, if we're going to set up a regulatory structure, I would like to be able to enforce that as independently as possible. The players today who may agree agreeable might be different in different circumstance, and so I think that the concern you raise is a good one, and as we move forward, I want to figure out how we have structures in place so regardless of what that relationship looks like, we can still do the job that the public wants us to do.
Mm-hmm. And so this new framework that's in the one-pager on the agenda today would do just that. We would not rely on any sort of data from the platforms. That means the 90-day grace period goes away, but it also means the privacy concerns or the data sharing concerns also go away because we wouldn't be asking for that anymore. And I think on the ground, it's not much of an increased barrier to entry for folks because the city already requires a business license to do short-term rentals. And what we would be saying is, along with that, you would need to get a special regulatory license with a pretty minimal fee. Ideally, on the city's end, this is work for our regulatory staff to do, but I know they want to do this. They would have the same, it would be one form, get you both licenses. So you've got to fill out one form now, you'd have to fill out one form in the future. And it wouldn't be in-person registration. We wouldn't require an inspection up front. There are other cities that have very low compliance rates, but they're, my understanding is you've got to go into an office. There are a lot of hoops you have to jump through that we would not be doing. And the reason why we still want folks to come through and register is we'll need to be able to verify primary residence. So part of that registration would be affirming this is my primary residence, and we could either check that with state records automatically or follow up on a spot check basis when there's complaints or various other enforcement scenarios.
And the licensing process could all be done online?
Yes.
Yep.
The city could also find the non-registered operators through data scrapes or on a complaint basis. So we don't anticipate that everyone would come in, part maybe just some people don't know, but we think with a very simple online form, we could get most folks to comply and follow up with the rest. And so this would apply, this would essentially mean going forward, you would only be able to rent on the short-term market out of your primary residence, and this would take effect after 1 year after the regulations or the ordinance is enacted.
So there'd be a compliance window that would allow 1 year.
Yes.
Okay.
Then the other question that came up was, what do we do with existing secondary residence operators who feel like they have been following the law as well as they could, and so we have proposed a limited amnesty window where folks can come in and register. Our proposal here is one dwelling unit per household. If they can prove that they've had a business license and they've been paying applicable taxes, they'd be able to continue with that rental for a period of 10 years or until the property changes ownership. And I think you wanted to speak to this a little bit, Councilmember.
Thank you. I think you captured the intent well. There is sort of a tweak on the concept of an amnesty I wanted to lift up a little bit. There are still discussions about how to address it, but both with the previous proposal and with this proposal, as it relates to the impacts on existing operators, the choice that existing operators would have whether or not it's under the 90-day cap or this proposal is, even though they aren't doing anything expressly prohibited by the law, the rules have changed sort of midstream. Their options, should the regulations go into effect, are either to sell the property, become a long-term landlord, or let their property go vacant. And I just felt that those are bad policy choices to force people to take. Specifically as it relates to forcing people who have chosen not to become long-term landlords, to forcing them to become landlords. So the tweak on this exemption, though, is that I feel that people who have acted as landlords in the past or are currently acting as landlords at other property, this exemption should not apply to them. So if they've converted a piece of property from a long-term rental to a short-term rental, or they have other properties that are long-term rentals, I think they're perfectly capable of being, they've already demonstrated that they're capable of being landlords. So that addresses, not including them in that exemption goes a long ways towards addressing my concerns about that issue. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question around that?
Yeah.
I'm curious as how we landed at the sort of 10-year period. That seems to me like, one of the things that I respect that we're trying to accomplish here from a policy perspective is regulating out the folks who are buying up old apartment buildings and converting them into a 4-unit, effectively Airbnb hotel. But it seems to me like one of the objectives that we should have here is to allow folks who have been good actors to stay in the system. Why ask people and put sort of like a 10-year period on the good actors as part of this?
I did not select the 10-year period as part of this, the development of this option. I don't know if it's related to sort of standard language that we use with non-conforming uses, but maybe you can speak to that.
It was suggested 5 years, 10 years. We just chose 10 years as a discussion point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think from a policy perspective, again, I think what we want to do with regulations is make sure that we get the bad actors out of the system. But if we've got folks who have been, playing by the rules, that piece seems like it needs a little more discussion, I think, from my perspective.
One other piece of information on that point is we've heard from HomeAway, which I think captures the secondary market a lot more than Airbnb does. And as they said in public testimony, half of the units that were rented in 2012 were no longer rented were no longer listed in 2015. And so there are certainly some and maybe many units that last for years and years and years on a more permanent basis. But I think there's a lot of churn in the industry. And so 10 years or a longer time period allowed kind of that natural churn to allow folks to make the decisions to exit when it was convenient for them.
And as it relates to the amnesty concept, because I've heard from folks about the impacts of short-term rentals, either in their buildings or in their neighborhoods, it would be helpful for me to learn more about the enforcement authority that the city has. I had a situation in my district that we intervened on the behalf of a neighbor who had basically a party house. They were advertising it as having capacity for like 30 people, and FAS in that instance was able to intervene and make them take the listing down and issued a notice of, actually it wasn't FAS, it was DCI, notice of violation. But to be able to get a little bit of a handle, I mean, that's one example, but if there are other things that community members can be doing to increase the livability, should we enact an amnesty? I think it would be helpful to understand more about that. Also, as it relates to the rights of folks in condos to enforce their association rules around this.
Yeah, the condo one gets complicated because many of the examples that have been given where condos are converted, their homeowners association actually doesn't prevent that, and that then creates the problem where the rules for that building prohibit that kind of renting. We don't hear from those folks. So we have about 5 more minutes for this. So do you want to?
Just to wrap up, I think what these changes allow is the city gets an enforceable system that prevents any further loss of long-term housing to the short-term rental market. Existing operators that have tried their best to follow the rules and that use a secondary residence would be allowed to continue for now, and then over time, over the long run, these units would shift back also to the long-term market.
Councilmember O'Brien, go ahead.
One of the things that I think I'm trying to center as I think through this is where this market is going. A few years ago, yes, a few people rented units on Craigslist or something, but it was the platforms Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway that enabled, that created that marketplace and enabled more people to do it. And so it's a new market. We're trying to get our heads around what are the policy implications of this, which we're struggling with because there's competition. We know we have some data on what's happened in the last few years, but what's clear from the data I've seen is that, every few months that that pool of housing is changing significantly. I saw one data point that said 30% increase in a certain aspect of Airbnb's business in the last 7 months. And so both trying to understand what the impacts are today, and we heard a lot of people saying, well, we don't think it's going to make much of a difference, but if this continues on the same trend line for the next 5 years, it could really have significant changes. And so trying to get in there and put a regulation in place before more people make different investment or business decisions, and we lose control of a policy decision that I think we really care about, which is how do we manage the housing market in Seattle.
Thanks for making that observation. I think we saw the study out of San Francisco that of all of the available units for rent in the San Francisco market today, about 20% of them are short-term rentals. And our central staff analysis showed that in Seattle, of the available units for rent on the market, about 12.5% were short-term. So I think that's why we're motivated to look at this and how do we reasonably regulate where we allow this kind of innovation that's happening in the economy to flourish. We like the entrepreneurship of that, but at the same time protect long-term rental stock in the city. And I think our view is protecting long-term rental stock, whether it's market rate or affordable, because it takes both of those to properly serve the community.
And there are lots of entrepreneurship opportunities in long-term rentals too. I mean,
yes.
If people have investment money and want to go buy properties and rent those out, we want to encourage that.
And there are new companies being formed to help governments regulate this area. There's a site called Host Compliance that offers to cities around the country, we'll do all this regulation for you. So we're all contributing to the economy here. But we are going to do this well. We're going to take our time to get it right. I just want to, again, thank folks that came in today and shared your perspective and your opinions. We do appreciate that. We do listen to that. We've been reading your emails and letters that we've been getting, and we will continue this discussion over the coming months.
Can I ask
So,
one last thing? I mean, I think I really appreciated the work that Keto, you, and the rest of Central staff did on the revenue side of things too. I mean, I was really blown away at our last hearing with the number of folks who came in and said, we'd like to be taxpayers. We'd like you to tax us more for the short-term rental marketplace. I think that continued focus on what some potential revenue solutions here would look like would be of really interest to me. So as we continue to go forward with these discussions, I'd like us to not lose sight about the revenue side and just solely focus on the regulation, because I think a revenue-based solution here could help address some of the issues about market affordability. It could be one of those places where we're looking at either tapping into more resources for affordable housing or for other sort of policy goals that we have as a city. So I want to keep working with central staff on what some revenue tools would look like too.
Great. As we get toward the end of the summer, when we shift into legislation writing phase, we'll be forming a working group on that, including stakeholders from the community, from the rental platforms, and others that are interested in this as we move into the legislation writing phase. So thank you again very much for coming down. You're certainly welcome to stay as we talk about the business and occupation tax and other issues, but take your conversations out into the lobby, please. And Nate, if you could read items 2 and 3.
Council Bill 118716, an ordinance related to increasing the business license